According to Catalyst, a leading global nonprofit supported by some of the world's top CEOs and corporations to build a workplace which is more amenable and welcoming to women. Only 6.5% of women worked in male-dominated fields as of 2020. Furthermore, a recent Gallup poll, according to Forbes, revealed that 51% of American women classify themselves as sports fans. Which leads us to a fascinating and intriguing question. Could a woman's increased knowledge and love of sports lead to higher ascension in the boardroom, at work? For Amy Siegfried, the answer is a resounding yes. She's an entrepreneur, TEDx speaker, and podcast host who says if women have the ability to talk sports, it elevates them on the corporate ladder. So, after seeing how the ability to talk sports gave an advantage to her female friends, herself, and her brother, set to work, creating a platform known as Last Night's Game, which levels the playing field for women and their ability to talk sports, even if they're not a sports enthusiast at all. Siegfried joined me this week to discuss how upping a woman's knowledge on sports can help them advance both in their personal, professional, and societal life. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Absolutely. So, Amy, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to learn how you help women succeed in sports and business. Great to be with you today. And thanks so very much for being here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Amy, let's talk some sports. I know you started an initiative with your brother that allowed women to sort of join the conversation about sports, even if they knew nothing about it. So I'm fascinated to learn how it all began for you.
Well, it's really interesting. So we really do, we work with, we call the sports curious. So those are people who maybe don't know a lot about sports, but need to talk about them in social situations. And I put my husband in that category too, because he's in sales. And so he has to kind of know a little bit about everything. But the whole idea of Last Night's Game came from when I worked in Major League Baseball. And I had a girlfriend at a game with me, and the guys were running off the field, and she said, well, why are they running off the field? And I said, well, they have 3 outs. And she said, well, what's an out? And so I realized that we were like 22 years old at that point. And I had realized that she really had didn't have that advantage that I had in the world of sports, working in a male dominated industry. And so I thought, how do I make this approachable for people who really don't care that much about the box score? They don't care about the rules and regulations. And so I had the idea, that was 2000 and probably 2-ish, 3. And it wasn't the right time. I was working 80 hours a week, and my brother, we worked together, I was still in high school. And so about 14 years later, when I moved back from Singapore to the US, it wasn't the right time to find a job. And so and I couldn't find anything. So I thought, okay, well, it's between Thanksgiving and New Year's. No one's going to hire. So why don't we give this idea we had a go and see what happens? And so that's kind of the genesis of where this all started, and truly giving people an extra tool in their tool belt when it comes to conversation and really leveling the playing field at work or out at a networking event and being able to really chime in, know a little bit about everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And give me an idea about the level of impact that last night's game has had on women's advancement in sports and other male-dominated industries.
Well, I think it's really interesting. And for us, I look at the ability to just shift what is presented to people. And so, there's been a huge push, as we know, as sports people, for women's sports. And so I've really enjoyed, myself included, learning more and really pushing that out as someone who kind of pays attention to the industry. But nothing makes me more excited when someone says, hey, I really love that you shared about the WNBA game. Or when I turn on ESPN, and I don't have anything to do with this, but turning on ESPN and having a WNBA game be the first clip on the show on SportsCenter is awesome to me. And I really love seeing that availability and seeing women's sports and these talented athletes being recognized at a whole new level. And that has been really cool for me to see that shift, that paradigm shift as someone who covers sports and how mainstream media is covering sports. And so I really love seeing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And give me an idea. I know, as you mentioned, you work for the MLB, and you also have worked in other male-dominated arenas and fields. So tell me, when you think of women's empowerment, what do you think of?
Well, when I think of women's empowerment, I think of really capitalizing and women owning exactly the talents they have. I mean, I think that is a huge piece of that, and the world recognizing that. And I think there are so many talented women out there, and it's no disservice to the men out there as well. But there are so many talented women out there that have long been unrecognized for their talents and their abilities. And look no further, like we just said, about women in sports. And so I really love seeing, and the women empowerment to me is seeing women get their due. Being recognized for what they're doing and being celebrated, getting paid the same. All those things really do factor into what it means to be able to empower women to go forth and conquer.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Amy, I'm going to share just a bit about myself. So I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy, and outside of hosting this podcast, I work with organizations and individuals with disabilities to get them more infused in the workforce. So last week was actually National Accessibility Awareness Week. So when we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion for folks with disabilities and women with disabilities, how do you think we get them more infused in the workforce?
That's a really interesting question. And I think a lot of it is education. And I think that's a lot of raising awareness because, as you've clearly stated, that just because someone has a disability doesn't mean that they are not able to join the workforce. And so I think that a huge piece of that is education. And that is a huge a part of what makes people recognize that is an ability. Those are people you can hire. And I also think it's a comfortability factor. I have had a brother-in-law who was born with a severe brain trauma, and so for his entire life he struggled with that, was in wheelchairs. And so for me, when I met my husband, that was just not. I wasn't comfortable. I'd never really been around people with disabilities, and for me, that was a learning process to realize, okay, you talk to him just like everybody else. And I say that to say, I think people just don't do things that are uncomfortable. They don't like to do things that push them outside of their comfort zone. And so I think that continued and further education and interaction, and it's kind of the chicken and the egg, right? We need to bring people into the workforce in order to recognize and be comfortable with people with disabilities in the workforce. And so it's kind of that, I'd love to see that cycle continue. But what I really love seeing too is the Special Olympics are this week in Florida. And ESPN is doing, I think, like 68 hours worth of coverage and stories on the Special Olympics. And I think just like we talked about with women's sports, raising that level of competition to the mainstream. And once again, making people approachable, making the conversation comfortable. I mean, one could argue things like Pride Month are very similar, and I don't want to compare it's apples to oranges, but it's still something that's not a mainstream. At once upon a time, was not a mainstream, main street type of conversation, and now it's like, okay, this is no big deal. And so I think as we continue to educate people on how everyone can really work together and how we are truly better together, I think is such a huge piece of that. And companies continuing to provide coverage and all those things that really do continue to raise the level of visibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about education. When I work with employers, that's the first question they ask me about, the level of productivity and how much money this is going to cost me, right? So
Right.
I appreciate that answer for sure. And tell me, when we look at pushing more women in sports and positions of leadership, I'm also curious to ask you about breaking down the attitudinal barrier to progress in this area and how you view that as well.
Well, I love seeing that we have women in leadership positions, and that's not something when I worked in sports you really had. You had a role here or there, but not so much. And so I really love that, because I think we, as kind of like we just talked about, as we continue to diversify our leadership teams, we become better. And that is to the point of not hiring people who work the same way you do or who think the same way you do. It's really diversifying that leadership team. And so bringing women on board, excuse me, I think is a huge piece of that. I think as we continue, we'll be a better company, or companies will be better when we diversify our leadership teams, and whatever that might look like. But if that's backgrounds and that's something, I was talking to someone the other day that we struggle with a little bit at last night's game, because my brother and I are obviously come from the same household. We come from the same background. We have a lot of the same beliefs. And so it's sometimes that is a challenge for us to say, okay, that's what we would like, but how does this look from a different perspective? And so I think that's something people really need to understand and think about is adding diversity to your board and to your leadership team looks like a lot of different pieces. And so I really love to see that happen. And it provides a different perspective, which just makes us better as a company.
And the competitive advantage, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have it down.
And you can tell I've done this a time or two. Huh?
Just a couple times, huh?
And Amy, I know that you're a third generation entrepreneur, and you once flew around the world in about 58 hours and 37 minutes. And you've lived internationally, as you mentioned before, and you've also done some motivational speaking. So tell me about that experience and the power of the authentic human connection and how important do you think that is in business?
I think it's hugely important. And I that's something I really pride myself on trying to do is be authentic. I mean, we live in a world now of Facetunes and filters and all these things, and truly, and social media, and truly no one's life looks like that. And no one's child is great all the time and all these things. And so I think it's really important to share those struggles, because that's such a huge piece of what makes you who you are. And one of my favorite things is really truly is people's stories. And it makes us who we are. It makes us better, but it also makes us empathetic, because once we understand and we see that people are all struggling, people all have their highs and their lows, and their kid throws food at them right before they walk out of the door in their nice white suit too. And so it's kind of one of those that I look at it and think it makes you from a business perspective, it makes you relatable. But I think from a human connection perspective, it provides you with empathy. It really does showcase and show you and show others that everything isn't perfect, and it's important for us to learn how to work with others. And so I think it goes back to that, once again, that full circle of really surrounding yourself or embracing those who aren't like you, And I think that's so important to build us as humans and build us as business people, because like you said, it's a competitive advantage. And it's interesting. I was actually having a conversation with a friend the other day who's in production. She has a production company. And she said, hey, when you do your podcast, how long does it take you to edit and produce, et cetera? And I said, I mean, I edit it in the intro and edit the outro. And, if I sneeze in the middle, I take that out, but I don't, I don't edit it. To me, it's really important for it to sound approachable, to sound like, you and I talking. And there are some of the really big podcasts, they are really edited, and that's great. That's fine. But it's just, to me, that's really important. And I think that's the world we live in now, that authentic and maybe slightly unedited is not a bad thing.
Well, yeah, and in order to get a certain perspective or point across that really drives the point home, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think, but I mean, it just makes us all humans, right? I mean, that's the biggest thing. We're all the same when it comes down to it. And so I think that, and that's something I learned from living internationally too, is no matter where you are in the world, everybody has the same basic needs. Everyone wants to take care of their family. Everyone wants to make sure there's food on the table and that you have a roof over your head that's safe. And so the more you really dive into that, the more it really becomes that we're all very similar when it comes down to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, based on your wealth of experience in a variety of different fields, I'm curious not to get your political opinion, but how do you think we can sort of bridge the societal gap of division that seems to be prevalent today in America, and how we can promote a better sense of unity? Because I think we're more alike than the media and others like to give us credit for. So tell me, how do you think we can bridge the gap of division and work towards a bridge of unity?
It's a really good question. I don't know that there's a one time answer. I think once again, it's pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone. It's having conversations. It's also, like I said, surrounding yourself or introducing yourself and really being familiar with people who don't look like you, who don't believe the same things you do. And I think that also speaks to how we talk to our children and what we show them and how we discuss all the things that are happening. And to me, I guess I just look at it and think it kind of goes back to, how do you want to be treated? And I want to be treated with respect. And that isn't easy to do, right? I mean, we have to, in order to give respect, lots of times we have to learn about someone. We have to learn about different things. We have to learn about different cultures. And, living overseas, you realize that people eat different things and all this, all those things. And you think, okay, I'm not going to think this is a stinky, smelly fruit. This is something that's a delicacy here. Let me try it. I don't have to eat it. I don't have to love it, but let me try it and appreciate what these people are, what these people enjoy. And I think it just kind of, to me, it goes into really, truly trying to step back and stop talking and listen. And that is a huge piece of that. I think that in the way we are right now, we're so apt to argue with someone over their point and try to make them believe your point, where it's okay if we don't agree. And I think there's a huge piece of that once again goes into that empathy of, I appreciate your perspective and I respect it. And you know what? It's okay that we don't agree on gun control or abortion or healthcare or whether or not McDonald's French fries are better than Burger King French fries. Like, it's all okay. And you don't have to be right all the time. And so I think that it's just kind of getting off that high horse and really respecting other people, other people's cultures, other people's beliefs. And I just think that's a huge piece of it. I don't think there's a right answer. And I don't know that I even answered that well or said it well, but I think ultimately it comes down to respect.
You answered it authentically, so I appreciate that. And I've got a 2-part question to ask you next, and it has to do, I firmly believe about a representation mattering, and also that I live my life through a prism that inclusion is the gateway to independence. So when we circle back to women's empowerment. I'm curious to ask you about representation mattering, and also the debate over pay equality for women as well, and where you come down on that discussion also.
I do think representation matters. I have a family member who always says you can't be it if you can't see it. And I do think that is a huge piece of that. I think we all need to be able to see people like us doing things that we want to do or setting goals. And if you've never seen, and I had this conversation way back when Hillary Clinton was running for president, and I said to someone, but you have to understand, little girls when I was growing up didn't say we wanted to be president because that was never an option. We never saw anybody as president. And so for me, that was never even an option. And so I really love, I'd probably be a terrible president, but that's a whole nother sidebar. But I do think it's important for us to recognize our dreams and to understand that there are jobs and there are things out there that we may not have ever even seen before. And so seeing someone who looks like us, who acts like us, who does that, it's huge. I think it's such a huge piece of who we are and what we can be. And that goes to not even just children, but as adults. And it also goes both ways, I think. I think it's really, we see people doing maybe not so great things, and we go, okay, well, maybe that's not what I want to do, or it's the only example we see. And so I do think representation matters. I think it's great. We're seeing women come up as coaches in the NFL and Major League Baseball, and that's awesome. I think that is the most amazing thing to see, because women can have sports brilliance and they can sit on the sidelines and do just as great a job as a man does. And I think that, to me, is such a cool piece. And once again, it makes us a better team because we have a diverse perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Amy, I know that when you're not speaking or giving a speech or talking about sports and entrepreneurship, you're also raising a toddler. So I'm curious to ask you about life balance and the importance of finding what really is important to you, both professionally and personally, and finding the correct balance.
It's hard. It really, it's so much harder than I ever really pieced together. And I would say there is no such thing as balance. Some days are hair on fire and we're eating takeout, and that's just what that looks like. And other days you're able to spend time together. And I've tried really hard to be present. And I think that's something I never really acknowledged or understood before I had my son, to be present. And so that's really important to me. On weekends, I do my best to put down my phone and be there with him. If that's play Candyland or whatever that might be, something to just be. And as a mom, there's always something to do. There's always clothes to wash. The kitchen needs to be cleaned up, dishes to be done, whatever that might be. And sometimes, and I think COVID has taught us that it's okay if the dishes stay in the sink for just a little bit longer, to have that quality time together. And that is something that I strive to do. It's not perfect. It's not great. And I'm not always great at it. But it's something I try. And that is, to me, is important. And I love that he gets back in 2020, I went back to get my MBA, and it was out of state. And so I traveled every other weekend. And it was really hard on me mentally. And I just remember someone saying to me, your son will see what hustle looks like. And that to me, when it really comes down to it, is important for him to see his mom out hustling, doing the best she can for all the things. And I know he probably won't appreciate it until he's much older and has kids of his own. But that is just, to me, it's being what you can't see, it's being that representation. And that to me is important, is doing the best I can with what I have, and, being authentic, and just sometimes flying by the seat of your pants.
Yeah. Kids reap what they see, don't they?
Right. It's true. It's so true.
Yeah. So for me, Amy, I'll just share a quick story. Before
Please.
I hosted this podcast, I was the job developer at the YMCA here in Windsor, and my boss's desk and I were directly across from each other, right? And she told me, because I used to email her at like 8:30 at night, and she told me, after 5 o'clock, when you turn off your laptop, emails can wait until the next day. So I've tried to implement that in my professional life, that just because it's in your inbox, both on your computer and in your life, doesn't necessarily mean it needs an immediate answer, right? So
That's so true, and not everybody has that vision, or that it doesn't, that you do need downtime, because that makes us better employees, right? I mean, you wanted to work harder for that boss, I'm sure, because she gave you that sort of break in that distance.
yeah, it's important to find your inner center, isn't it?
That is true. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And my final question for you today has to do with both how do you celebrate wins in life, and when you look at your legacy, I interviewed a business person the other day, and he told me about his legacy. It's not about the day you die or the day that you're born. It's about the dash in between the day you die and the day you're born, and how you sort of implement that in your life. So when you look at your legacy and celebrating wins, how do you think you want your dash to be remembered?
Oh, that's always it's a great question. And, for me, I would say the biggest piece of that is leaving people better than I found them, because I want to say leaving the world better than I found it, but I'm not sure that that's something that I can influence, right? I wish I could solve world hunger, but that's probably not something in my wheelhouse. But I would say making people a better version of themselves. And that is a huge piece of what I try to do. I try to work with people who are younger generations, and of the younger generation, have new startups, and really help them find the best version of them. And I mean, sometimes it's as small as last night I had a conversation with the babysitter after I got home from dinner, and she was saying how she feels kind of underconfident on some things, and she's not sure how to. And I said, well, you should be confident. Let's talk through this. Why is that? Well, okay, well, I can't tell you what's going on in your life, but let me tell you what happened in my life at that point when I was your age. I got fired, all these different things. And it's like, it's okay. Everyone has their ups and downs. And so I feel like leaving people better than you found them is a huge piece of that, because then they can go off and it's a ripple effect, right? And maybe you're not changing the world, but maybe you're changing your community, and making people sort of pass it on, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Amy, finally, tell me, if people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that?
Well, you can follow us on Instagram at Last Night's Game. That is the platform that I am on all the time, for better or for worse. So feel free to DM us, and that is me. I will answer you. As well as our website is lastnightsgame.com. We have a podcast called Sports Curious, which is about a 5-minute podcast once a week on all major platforms. Obviously, we're on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and all the other things as well. So,
well, fabulous, Amy. As an old sports reporter, I circled this interview on my calendar, and I want to thank you for your good work in the area of sports and entrepreneurial leadership, and for joining me today. It's most appreciated.
Oh, it was such a pleasure. Thanks for not asking me the hard-hitting sports questions.
Well, sometimes you have to learn how to stay in your lane, right?
Yeah. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.